Charles Winthrop had everything money could buy. A penthouse overlooking the Thames, a wine cellar rivaling royal estates, and a reputation as one of London's most philanthropic billionaires. He wore charm like a tailored suit, always pressed and polished, generous to a fault. But no one ever wondered who polished his marble floors or pressed his linen shirts. Her name was Eliza. For 22 years, Eliza was the quiet fixture in his life, always punctual, always tidy, always invisible. She moved like a shadow, offering warm tea on rainy days and disappearing before questions could form. Charles had never asked where she lived, if she had family, or what made her eyes glisten sometimes when she thought no one was looking. But then one Tuesday she didn't show up. Charles, annoyed but vaguely concerned, called the agency. They had no record of her. In fact, they'd never employed a maid by that name. His curiosity turned to unease. He searched her quarters, a modest servant's room tucked behind the kitchen, and discovered something taped beneath the bed frame. A photograph, torn, faded, and in it, unmistakably, stood a much younger Eliza, with a child and Charles, but he had no memory of it. What he'd uncover next would change everything. Charles Winthrop was a man carved from ambition, the kind who turned boardroom deals into billion-dollar triumphs and enemies into mere footnotes in his biography. His mansion in Kensington was tastefully excessive, chandeliers imported from Vienna, original Monets on the wall, and a koi pond that cost more than most homes. But for all his fortune, his nights were often silent. His ex-wife had remarried. His son preferred backpacking across South America to cocktail parties with old money. In a life filled with luxury, Charles's most loyal companion had been Eliza, his maid. Eliza never made mistakes. She ironed his shirts with military precision, brewed his coffee exactly at 6:30 a.m., and maintained a silence that Charles found oddly comforting. She wasn't just efficient. She was reliable in a way few people in his life had ever been. He paid her well, gave her holidays, bonuses, even asked about her health on occasion. Still, he knew next to nothing about her. She never spoke of her past, declined most personal questions with a soft, apologetic smile, and never had visitors. He trusted her, implicitly, as one trusts an old wristwatch. Familiar, predictable, essential. But behind her gentle eyes and practiced bow, Eliza was hiding something. And Charles was about to find out how little he really knew. It began with subtle changes, the kind only someone as observant as Charles would notice. Eliza, once as predictable as sunrise, began to alter her routine. Twice in 1 week, she asked to leave early. She started receiving phone calls, rare, brief, and always answered in the hallway, her voice low and tense. Once, Charles spotted her wiping tears from her cheek after one such call, quickly composing herself before entering the drawing room. At first, he brushed it off. Everyone had lives beyond their jobs, even maids. But something about Eliza's behavior gnawed at him. She was loyal, private, yes, but never secretive, never anxious. It wasn't suspicion that crept into his mind, not exactly. It was concern. He found himself wondering if she was in trouble, if someone was threatening her, if perhaps she had fallen into something she couldn't escape from alone. So, on a rainy Friday afternoon, when she again requested to leave early, citing an appointment, Charles made a decision that surprised even him. He would follow her, just once, just to make sure she was safe. Charles waited 5 minutes after Eliza stepped out, then took the service exit and slid into his discreet black Audi. The chauffeur had the day off, a convenient coincidence, so he was alone. He trailed her carefully, staying 2 cars behind. She didn't take the tube or hail a cab. She walked, briskly, with purpose, through winding streets he barely recognized. The further they moved from Kensington, the more alien the world became. Graffiti-covered walls, cracked pavements, children playing soccer with a flat ball, the vibrant hum of working-class London, so distant from his glass-walled life. He felt strange, out of place. What if she saw him? What would he even say, "I'm worried about you"? Would she laugh, be angry? He kept driving. Eventually, she stopped in front of a narrow, weathered building with boarded-up windows and faded signage. She looked both ways before entering, the heavy door closing behind her. Charles pulled over a few houses down and killed the engine. The street was quiet, save for the hum of traffic in the distance. He stared at the building, unsure of what he expected. A meeting, a secret boyfriend, some tragic family reunion. The minutes passed, he waited, and then just as he was considering leaving, the door creaked open again. What he saw next would change his understanding of Eliza forever. Eliza emerged from the building, but she wasn't alone. One by one, children followed her. Small hands clutching coats too thin for the weather, shoes with soles worn nearly to knitting. A dozen at least, maybe more. Some were quiet, others laughed and clung to her as though she were a favorite aunt. One little girl, with bright red boots, wrapped her arms tightly around Eliza's waist, and Eliza leaned down to whisper something that made her smile. Then came the elderly, two women with walkers, a man with a crooked back. Eliza handed out small parcels from a bag, sandwiches, fruit, tea in mismatched mugs. She moved with calm efficiency and unmistakable tenderness, her eyes soft, her touch gentle. This wasn't an errand. This was a mission. Charles sat frozen behind the wheel, blinking in disbelief. This rundown building was a shelter, a sanctuary. And Eliza wasn't just volunteering, she was leading, directing the flow of people, checking lists, offering medicine from a tin box. She hugged a crying teenager, offered her scarf to an old man, and when no one was looking, she wiped a tear from her own cheek. All this time Charles had thought he was the benefactor, the giver. But Eliza had been giving more than he ever had, in places he'd never set foot. She wasn't just a maid, she was a lifeline to people forgotten by the city. As she disappeared back inside, Charles realized something unsettling. He had employed her for over 2 decades, paid her well, trusted her. Yet he had never truly seen her. And now for the first time, he wasn't sure who owed whom. Eliza had learned early that the world owed her nothing. Born in a cramped East End flat to immigrant parents, scraping by on factory wages, she was the oldest of the 5. Her mother died when Eliza was 16. Her father, unable to cope, drifted into addiction and disappeared soon after. The burden fell to Eliza, a teenager who became a mother overnight. She worked relentlessly, waitressing by day, cleaning offices by night, studying between shifts so her siblings wouldn't have to drop out. She kept the lights on, fed them, fought off landlords with polite defiance, and learned to smile through exhaustion. But life rarely showed mercy. Her youngest sister died of a treatable illness. The hospital visit delayed too long due to lack of insurance. Eliza buried her with money she borrowed and never repaid. Her brother Marcus, the brightest of them all, was stabbed in a street altercation, wrong place, wrong time. He died in her arms. That was the moment everything changed. Grief became her fuel. Eliza refused to let the suffering end with her. Every spare pound from her maid's salary went toward food, coats, bus fare for runaways. She volunteered at churches, then started a weekend soup kitchen. Eventually, with donations from those she quietly inspired, she opened the shelter. It wasn't much, peeling walls and a leaky roof, but it was safe, warm, hopeful. Eliza never sought recognition. She kept her uniform neat, her head down, and her story silent, because in a world that had taken everything from her, she had chosen to give everything back, and that, she believed, was her purpose. Charles didn't sleep that night. He stared at the ceiling of his opulent bedroom, haunted by everything he hadn't seen. The woman who dusted his art collection, who served his breakfast with quiet grace, had endured a life so brutal it would break most men. Yet she hadn't broken. She'd built something beautiful from her pain. And he had never asked, never noticed. Guilt clawed at him, not because he had done something cruel, but because he had done nothing at all. He'd praised himself as generous, while the most extraordinary act of generosity unfolded right under his roof, unnoticed. He remembered the tea she'd bring when he was ill, how she'd once stayed late when his dog had surgery, quietly offering to walk it. It had never occurred to him that behind those kind eyes was someone who had loved and lost far more than he could imagine. He had mistaken humility for simplicity, silence for absence. He realized now that Eliza had never needed his charity, only his humanity. And for the first time in years, Charles felt small, but also inspired. The next morning, Eliza entered the drawing room with measured steps. Charles had asked to see her before breakfast, an unusual request. She noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he didn't look up from the window immediately. Her heart pounded. Had she been found out? Was he angry? He finally turned. "I followed you yesterday," he said softly. She froze. "I saw the shelter," he continued. "I saw you." Eliza's hands trembled, but she didn't speak. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked. There was no accusation in his voice, only wonder and shame. She met his gaze, her eyes calm but tired. "Because I didn't want pity, just purpose." The words hung in the air like truth that couldn't be undone. Charles felt something shift in him, respect rising like a tide. He nodded slowly. "You've had it all along." And for the first time she smiled, not politely, not professionally, but honestly. Charles arrived at the shelter the following week, unannounced, unaccompanied, and utterly unprepared. He didn't bring a check or a speech, just two sleeves rolled up and a heart unsure of what it was walking into. Eliza greeted him with a raised brow but said nothing. She handed him a box of donated clothes and pointed to the sorting room. No special treatment, no acknowledgement, just work. And so he worked. He folded shirts, carried crates, washed dishes beside a retired nurse who didn't recognize him. For the first time in decades, Charles Winthrop was not a billionaire. He was simply Charlie, a man with two hands and time to give. Days turned into weeks. He came back regularly, anonymously at first, quietly observing how small gestures made massive differences. A sandwich, a listening ear, a warm blanket. And slowly, something shifted in him. He began to feel a sense of peace he hadn't found in boardrooms or gala halls. For the first time in his life, his wealth meant nothing, and his presence meant everything. Fulfillment, he realized, wasn't measured in margins or stock prices. It was measured in gratitude, in laughter, in human connection. At first, Charles donated in secret. Crates of fresh produce, new mattresses, medical supplies. Eliza noticed, of course, but she didn't press him. She let him come to his own conclusions. Eventually, he stepped forward publicly, not for credit, but to leverage his name for good. He contacted former business partners, friends in government, and foundations across the city. Within months, the shelter had a new roof, a proper kitchen, a small health clinic, even legal aid volunteers. Classrooms were added upstairs. GED programs, parenting workshops, resume coaching. The place transformed. But Eliza hesitated. "Don't let it become a machine," she warned gently. "These people don't need an institution. They need dignity." Charles nodded. He understood. They built with intention, keeping warmth at the center. No marble, no grandeur. Just safety, compassion, purpose. Together they walked a careful line, growing without losing soul. And every time he tried to overreach, to plan too big or spend too lavishly, Eliza would quietly guide him back to the heart of it all. "You're not here to rescue," she told him once. "You're here to stand beside." He never forgot that. Their relationship changed in ways neither of them had expected. No longer employer and maid, they became something richer. Partners in a cause. Confidence in quiet moments. Friends. Eliza no longer called him sir, and he no longer called her staff. They shared coffee on the shelter's back steps, joked about peeling paint, and sometimes sat in silence watching the children play. Charles found in Eliza a kind of truth he'd never known. She didn't flatter him, she grounded him. Through her, he learned humility, not as a concept, but as a practice. He saw grace not in grand gestures, but in the way she remembered every name, every story. She taught him how to listen, to serve without ego, to lead without applause. And he, in turn, reminded her that she didn't have to carry everything alone. Their lives, once parallel, now intertwined. Not family by blood, but by choice. Word spread quickly. The little shelter in East London became something more, a movement of quiet revolution. More volunteers came. Other shelters opened under Eliza's model. Children once abandoned were now thriving, some going to college, others starting businesses of their own. Families reunited. Addictions were conquered, futures rewritten, and among the wealthy elite, whispers grew into action. Charles's public support inspired others, CEOs, celebrities, even rivals, to put their wealth where their hearts ought to be. No cameras, no fanfare, just change. And at the heart of it all stood Eliza, still folding laundry, still holding hands, still refusing titles or praise, because the mission had never been about recognition, it had always been about restoration. Charles sat on the shelter's worn wooden bench, watching the sun rise over a community he once never knew existed. Children laughed behind him, volunteers moved with quiet purpose, and at the center, as always, was Eliza, steady, kind, unstoppable. He thought back to their first years, the silence, the distance, the surface-level gestures, and then he whispered, almost to himself, "She cleaned my house, but saved my soul." For years, he had measured life in assets and achievements. Now he saw that true worth lived in actions, in sacrifices, in the love you gave without expecting return. Eliza had never needed a spotlight, but she had lit the way. And Charles would never forget the lesson. You never know who walks beside you, what they've survived, what they've built in the shadows. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest purpose. Never judge someone by their job title, uniform, or silence. The world's greatest heroes often wear no medals, just humility and heart. Remember, small acts of kindness can ripple outward and become lifelines. A sandwich, a conversation, a moment of noticing. So ask yourself, who in your life might be quietly changing the world? If you believe in unseen heroes, in purpose over prestige, like, share, and comment below. Let's live the Elysees of the world. Let's pay attention, because sometimes the person folding your laundry is saving lives when no one's watching.